I really was trying to get in more classics this year, but like at what cost? People love this book. Yikes, guys. It felt kind of lazy actually, that won such a prestigious prize. This nearly killed me. I'm just so over it. Like, what the f are we doing? Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but it is the last day of 2024, and you know what that means, end of year videos. So today I would like to tell you all about the worst books that I read in 2024. I was lucky enough that 2024 was actually not that bad of a reading year. It wasn't particularly great either, but last year, for example, I had a lot more books that I genuinely really disliked / might have even hated. But this year I feel just more disappointed, and really that's mostly my fault because of mismanaged expectations. So these are the 10 worst books that I read this year, and they are ranked. So number 10 is the least worst, and number 1 is what I have dubbed as the worst book I've read this year. Coming in at number 10 is Cassandra Saw by Gwen E. Kirby. This is a short story collection. If you've been here a while, you know that I am not a fan of short story collections. So again, it's kind of my fault for even still trying to pursue short story collections. I think it's because there have been instances where single short stories have really impressed me and stuck with me and are some of my favorite things I've ever read. So I think I'm less trying to pursue an entire collection that I'll like and maybe just try and find a single short story. But all that to say, this one wasn't terrible, it just was disappointing. I think in my wrap up where I talked about this book, I said that it feels very like #girlboss, white BuzzFeed feminism. And I think I still stand by that. So it kind of came off a little bit trite, but there were a couple glimmers of positive things. One of the short stories was in the format of a Yelp review, where this man starts out giving a review of this restaurant that he was on a date with his wife at. And it kind of devolves into him talking about his relationship with his wife and airing his grievances. And I thought that the formatting of that was really unique, so that's a positive. I mean, it was fine, you know, it wasn't really like anything great. So I think this one was really just disappointing. Maybe in like an alternate reality, there is a Sam who likes short story collections who would have really enjoyed this, but in this current reality, I didn't like it. Next is a book that I read for my book club that I have with one of my friends and a couple of family members. You know, we really just keep soldiering on in this book club, despite almost all of the reads that we read being disappointing to the majority of us. I think we all just have very different tastes, and we are trying to like compromise so much that we end up choosing books that none of us like. But anyway, that's all to say that one of the books that we read that I really didn't like was The Beach by Alex Garland. Alex Garland is also a director, so he directed movies like Annihilation, which I really enjoyed. But I think the biggest issue I have with this one was probably just like the culture when it was written. So I just really didn't like the light that it showed women in. I didn't like how the men talked about and viewed women. And it wasn't like egregiously misogynistic, but in some ways I feel like those sort of like subtle microaggressions that they don't even realize are misogynistic are just as bad. So this is about a pair of travelers, a man and a woman, who are vacationing and like backpacking in Thailand, and they hear about this secret beach. The whole book is about like them trying to find the secret beach and then like the consequences of that. This was marketed as like a gritty, propulsive thriller, and I feel like even kind of like my own opinions aside about like how women are written, even just kind of like breaking it down and looking at it as a thriller, I feel like it wasn't very successful. Like there was so much buildup to the final climax, and then the climax was so fast and then it was over that it didn't really give you as a reader a sense of finality or completeness. So I just feel like the way it was structured wasn't very successful either. I don't know. This is an old book. Like I don't see anyone else talking about this book. So you probably are like, who cares, Sam? Like why are you talking about this book? But this is just, yeah, one of the worst things I read this year. So I don't think you should read it. Next is a horror manga short story collection. I feel like the way that this was marketed is kind of sneaky. So the art in this is done by Junji Ito. So I think on first glance, a lot of people would probably think, oh cool, another Junji Ito horror manga collection. But the actual stories themselves are not written by Junji Ito. They were written by Hirokatsu Kihara, and they're just not good. I feel like they're not really up to par with Junji Ito, so even having Junji Ito illustrating them was not enough to boost this up enough, and I just felt very, very disappointed by it. I don't remember a single story that I read from this, so that's doesn't bode well. This tells you I didn't really enjoy it at all, so I think you should avoid this one. Next is Grey Dog by Elliot Gish. So we're following a woman named Ada in 1901, and she is a teacher. And at the beginning of the novel, she's being sent to this kind of like remote backwater village to teach. And it's kind of hinted at from the beginning that she got into some trouble at her last post, which is why she had to very abruptly change, and she's pretty much being like sent away. So she arrives to this town and she's put up with this couple who used to have a child, but something happened to the child. And as she spends more time in this town, it's sort of like, ooh, things don't seem totally normal. You know, there's like these sort of rumblings that make it seem like there's something maybe supernatural happening. I love witchy stuff. I love women subverting the patriarchy. I don't know, this just didn't really do it for me. This didn't hook me. I felt kind of bored by it. And I was really wanting this to be like Slewfoot by Brahm. In some ways, this is very similar to Slewfoot. We have a main character who is kind of looked down on by society, who is really fighting to maintain her autonomy and her power. There are characters who have these weird tendencies, and it seems like they may or may not be dabbling in supernatural occult things, and may or may not be pulling our main character into that. But yeah, I don't know, this just felt very boring, and even sort of like the really big, plotty, what should have been really exciting parts of the story didn't feel that exciting to me. So yeah, I was pretty disappointed by this one. Okay, next is Out by Natsuo Kirino, and this was translated by Steven Snyder. The reason this is on the list is because I had extremely high hopes for this one. This is one where I was like certain it was going to be a beloved member of my bookshelf. But alas, I really didn't like this one. This is one that I chose for book club. So this was me trying to compromise less and start to choose books that I like wholeheartedly and really want to read. But yeah, none of us liked this one either. And it really was the handling of the ending mostly, which I'm not going to spoil anything, and then the pretty much gratuitous depictions of sexual assault and violence against women in this book. So this is again, another gritty, propulsive thriller set in Japan. We're following a group of women who work at this box lunch factory, and one of the women, in a rage, murders her good-for-nothing husband. I listened to this partially on audiobook, and the sequence where the woman murders her husband, she's like snapped, you know? And it's after he's like really mistreated her a bunch, so it's kind of like building it up to be this really satisfactory event for the reader to read about. And as she's like going through this rage, she's like, he needs to suffer, he sucks, I hate him, and kind of just like unapologetically being like, sorry, not sorry, I'm murdering you. So that like made my heart pitter patter in a good way. But then after she murders her husband, she panics and asks these women from the factory that she works at to help her dispose of the body. And then the whole rest of the book is basically like the fallout of that and them trying to not get caught and trying to not let it get out. And we're following a lot of different POVs, like some of the police who are investigating the murder and some old colleagues of one of the women in the group who may or may not have ties to the Yakuza. So it gets really twisty-turny. Yeah, on paper, it should have been like a slam dunk for me. I should have loved this. But there's one character who is introduced as having sexually assaulted and murdered this woman, basically tortured this woman to death. He went to jail, did some time, and then now that he's out, he runs like nightclubs and stuff. Yeah, just the way that that was written in such gratuitous detail for kind of like no reason. Like you could have just said, this is what he did. And it's like, all right, we got it. We got all the information we need to know about this character, aka he's a terrible person. So didn't like that. And then the way that it ended, it was just like, what the f? fuck? You know, like what the fuck are we doing? So really, really, really didn't like this. I still have a physical copy, but I am selling it. So this will not be in this house for much longer. So I cannot recommend this. If you like this, I'm like genuinely curious because a lot of people who have similar reading taste to me really like this. So I guess comment below if you've read this and you really liked it. I am really curious. Like, how did you find the ending and the depictions of sexual assault in this? I don't know. Okay, and then next is the book that won the Booker Prize this year, which is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This started out really promising. I got this from the library, but I had sticky tabs. So the plan was that I was gonna sticky tab the parts that I would eventually want to annotate when I got my own copy. And I was like fully intending that, okay, after I read this, I'm pretty much gonna immediately go out and buy my own copy and annotate it. But then it very quickly got very dull, and there's a lot of lists in this book, and I think people have mistaken sort of like the simplicity of the writing and that structure of just like using lists to communicate things as like profoundness. And really at the end of the day, it was just like, it felt kind of lazy actually. And I just didn't really see the same things that the Booker judges saw. You know, if this had just been like a random book that I read, I probably would have been like, fine, whatever, and then forgotten about it. But I think I am harder on it because it won such a prestigious prize and has been lauded by so many. Again, I think sometimes something being simple is just that. It's simple. It's not profound. I guess I didn't even like say what this is about. I'm just like assuming everyone knows because it's such a popular book. But for those of you who haven't heard, Orbital is a book about these astronauts who are on this spaceship that is orbiting the Earth. And I think every 24 hours they orbit the Earth 16 times. So they have like way more sunsets and sunrises, and they see different parts of the world at different times of the day all the time. And I think that at the beginning that was like very endearing, and there was like novelty in that. And, you know, there were a lot of musings about like the meaning of life and like feeling so minuscule in the grand scheme of the cosmos and all of that. But the novelty of that very quickly wore off. And then that's when you realize like, oh, this is just kind of like a pretty simple book. I don't really think Samantha Harvey is doing anything that profound. And I think it's a fine read. I think it's fine. There were a couple parts where I was like, oh, cool. That made my brain kind of happy to read. But for the most part, I can't say that I recommend this book. Next is another book club blunder. So this is The Foxwife by Yangzi Chu. This just, man... Again, I think this is mostly a me problem. But then after meeting with book club and the person who chose this book, she obviously like likes the themes and story elements of this book more than someone like me. And even she was like, not good. This takes place in Japan and Manchuria, and we're following this fox woman who can transform into a human. So in this world, it's kind of loosely based on this myth about how foxes can transform into people and sort of like manipulate and charm. So this woman is on a quest to find the person who murdered her daughter, and in the process she meets some other foxes from her past. And then there's also this like murder mystery that's like intertwined through her story as well. And then obviously it all becomes intertwined at the very end. I did not think that any of the characters were particularly well written. I didn't like any of the characters. They're not memorable. None of the plot was that exciting to me. None of the language was that exciting to me. The setting wasn't particularly well written, memorable, or exciting. I was trying to grasp at anything really to connect with the story, and I just didn't feel connection to any of it. So I do think it's largely because these kinds of books are not my typical cup of tea. But yeah, I think this is so high on the list because there was just like nothing for me to grasp onto. Like, it's giving nothing, you know? So if you have very similar reading taste to me, I don't think you would enjoy this, unfortunately. Okay, number 3, I contemplated putting this at number 1 because this book single-handedly put me into like a 3 to 4 month reading slump. Like, the thought of reading brought me the opposite of joy, and I hated that. But when looking back at like how much I annotated this and tabbed this, I felt that it was unfair to put it at the number 1 spot, despite how grueling it was to read. So that is Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Doblin, and this was translated by Michael Hoffman. Yikes, guys. Yikes. So, yeah, I annotated this a lot, and there were glimpses where I was like, Alfred, okay, man, like you can write in a way that my brain likes. But the majority of this was a slog, dude. A slog. And, you know, I really was trying to get in more classics this year, but like at what cost? And, you know, I love chaos. I love chaotic writing. I love nonsensical, surreal, like, f me up, fam. You know, I don't need things to always make total sense, but like I have a note in here, an annotation that says this novel is like reading an auctioneer with ADHD's stream of consciousness, so it's tough to parse the plot out from the chaos. It's like too much chaos. And I do think that's kind of the point. This wasn't an easy time. We're not reading about easy things happening, so I don't think that this was necessarily supposed to be an easy read, but like, man, this nearly killed me. So, okay, I haven't even told you what this is about, but this is about a man who has just been released from prison for murdering his girlfriend. Yeah, he's not a good person. Like, he hates women. And he claims, okay, I'm gonna like go on the straight and narrow now. I'm gonna be a good guy. I'm gonna get my life together. And then like, how do you think that goes, you know? So, positives about this. Each chapter started out with like a little pre-chapter summary, which I found to be like really funny. And there is a lot of humor woven throughout this story. But again, the negatives of this were just too strong. I was not strong enough to withstand them. However, I do want to read you one segment. It was like the one shred of hope that I was clinging to while I was reading this, because I really wanted to finish this, because I kept thinking, remember this passage, he can write like that. I don't want to miss out on future passages like that. And then there weren't really a lot more of those. A bee, a wasp, some buzzy thing is circling high up under the ceiling by the stovepipe. A miracle of nature at this time of winter. Its fellows of species and genus and outlook are dead, already dead or not yet born. It is the ice age that this solitary hummer is living through, not knowing how and why. The sunshine, however, that silently covers the front tables and section of floor, that is ancient, and actually everything looks transient and meaningless when you look at it. It has covered X miles to be here, having zipped past star Y. The sun has been shining for millions of years, since long before Nebuchadnezzar, Adam and Eve, and the ichthyosaur. And just now it is shining through the window of a small beer joint, spreads across the floor and tables, sliding imperceptibly forward. It covers them and they are aware of it. It is cheerful, light, more than light. Light. It has come down from on high. So it's like in the chaos, we would get like beautiful passages like this. And it's like, Alfred, give me more of that. I need more of that to be able to go on. And unfortunately, he did not give me enough of that. So this is number 3 on the worst things I've read this year. Next is The Blizzard by Vladimir Sorokin. Again, mismanaged expectations, guys. I actually don't think I had ever read any Russian literature before this. So maybe it's just like a Russian lit thing. But man, I really did not like this book at all. I expected this to be more surreal and absurd than it was. So this is about a doctor who's trying to get vaccines or medicine to this town, but he has to transport it through this blizzard. And while they are traveling, I was told that a lot of surreal stuff was supposed to start happening. I thought it would be kind of like Silent Hill, where the characters are obviously like hallucinating and seeing stuff that's not real, but it's based on their lived experience and things that have happened to them and sort of like permutations of their psyche. But this, it kind of just felt like random shit happening. For most of the story, it felt very grounded in reality. And then all of a sudden it was like way over the top and silly. So I don't know. I think Vladimir Sorokin's writing is just not for me. If you've read this, let me know. Is this kind of like par for the course for Russian lit? Because as a STEM girly, I did not have to take a lot of literature classes for any of my education. Maybe I'm just not a Russian lit girly. So yeah, definitely let me know if I just like shouldn't waste my time with other Russian lit. Okay, and then my number 1 worst book of the year. That goes to Utsubora, The Story of a Novelist by Asumiku Nakamura. This is a manga that has now been compiled into one single omnibus. And we're following a prolific author and writer in Japan. and he's getting to be older, and he's like worrying that he's past his prime, and he becomes involved with this really young woman, like really young, like gross age gap. She is a really big fan of his, and she also wants to write, and he basically plagiarizes her writing. So I thought that was a really interesting, potentially compelling synopsis. But man, just the way that women are treated and portrayed in this is just I'm just so over it. I don't know, maybe that was the point. I've watched other people's reviews and read other people's reviews, and people love this book. And again, I just feel like I didn't connect with anyone or anything in this story. And you know me, I love awful people doing awful things. So it's not even that I'm like, the bad people are doing bad things. Like, it's really not that. I love that. But it has to make sense, right? It has to be serving a purpose or providing some sort of commentary. And in this, it didn't make sense to me. I didn't like reading it. I don't think it's good. When I was putting this list together, as I was ordering them, this one just kept getting bumped up, 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 up. And then finally, when things shook out, it was at the top, and I was like, you know what? That feels right. So those were my 10 worst books of 2024. Again, I think, kind of looking back at my worst list from last year, I don't think this one was as bad. So maybe we're moving in the right direction, kids. I don't know. But you could like this video if you wanted. You could comment. What are the worst books you read this year? What are the books that you hated? Let me know so I can avoid them. You could watch my other videos. You could subscribe. Would love to have you. So this is my worst of vid. Next, we're gonna do my best of vid. I'm gonna do 24 books for the year 2024. So look forward to that. Thank you so much for being here. Love you very much. I'll see you in whatever video I make next. Okay, bye.